I need you all to ensure these projects are finalized. I have outside business to attend to and won't be available for the foreseeable future.
I hope I'm doing the right thing. Let me go find out if this family are really good people.
How this is it, and I will try testing this family as their maid to see if they are classists.
Why is she loitering in the guest hallway? Someone get her out of my sight! Are you deaf? I said you missed a spot. Or is that a language problem?
No, ma'am, I'll fix it. So this is how they treat people who are not in their class. Outside, they act so innocent. I'll make sure they learn the hard way.
People like her should be back in some village, begging on their knees for scraps. At least here she's on her knees for a reason.
This has been tough, but let's see how it goes.
All these maids they keep letting into this house. Jenny stayed on her knees, rag in hand, and said nothing. People like her should be back in some village, begging on their knees for scraps. Yuna said loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. At least here she's on her knees for a reason. Her friend laughed. Jenny's hand didn't move from the floor. 3 weeks ago, men bowed when she walked into a room. Tonight, she was being spoken about like she wasn't in it. Welcome to Afro meets Seoul Stories. On today's episode, you'd get a dose of unexpected encounters and beautiful beginnings. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification icon to get a reminder when new amazing stories drop, and send this story to friends and family who you think would love to watch it. And also, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now let's dive into this amazing story. Before you ask how Jenny Adeyemi-Kim, heiress to a $2 billion shipping empire, ended up scrubbing marble floors in the house of the family she was about to marry into, you need to understand what she gave up to get here. 3 weeks earlier she was Kang Joon-ho's fiancé. Seoul's most feared crime boss had asked her to marry him, and the strangest part was that he never once flinched at her fortune. He looked at her like the money was beside the point. But his family unsettled her from the first dinner. His mother, Madame Han, stared too long like she was looking at a ghost. His sister Yuna smiled with her mouth and hated with her eyes. Jenny's instincts, sharpened by a lifetime of people wanting her name and not her face, told her something was rehearsed. So she disappeared, took her cousin Simi's identity, walked through the servants' gate, and became invisible in the one house where she needed to see everything clearly. Now here she was, on her knees, being called something less than human by the woman who'd one day be her sister-in-law. Are you deaf? Yuna snapped, nudging Jenny's shoulder with her shoe. I said you missed a spot. Or is that a language problem? No, ma'am, Jenny said quietly. I'll fix it. She scrubbed the same spot again. Her jaw ached from clenching it. Somewhere above her, in a wing she wasn't allowed near, slept the man she loved, in a house that treated her like dirt while planning to sit her at their family table. Madame Han appeared at the top of the stairs and the hallway went still. Her eyes found Jenny's face and lingered, too long, too sharp. Jenny's pulse spiked. Does she know? Then Madame Han's expression hardened. Why is she loitering in the guest hallway? She said, not to Jenny but about her. Get her out of my sight. Yuna smiled, satisfied. You heard mother. Move. Jenny gathered her bucket and walked, spine straight, refusing to let them see her break. 3 nights later, standing outside a cracked door pretending to fold linens, she heard Madame Han's voice drop into something raw and old. A name spilled out, her father's name, spoken with 20 years of buried hatred. That man destroyed everything I built, Madame Han hissed. And now his daughter thinks she can walk into my family like nothing happened. Jenny's hands went still. Whatever secret connected her father to this house, it was about to collide with her wedding, and with everything she thought she knew about the man she was set to marry. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Someone was coming. Jenny pressed herself flatter against the wall, linens forgotten in her hands. That man destroyed everything I built, Madame Han hissed again, her voice cracking with something between grief and fury. 20 years, Yuna. 20 years I've carried this. And now his daughter is going to sit at my table and call me mother? Does Junho know? Yuna asked. No. And he won't. Not until I decide what to do about her. Jenny's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she was sure the sound would carry through the door. She backed away slowly, linens clutched to her chest, and didn't breathe again until she'd rounded the corner into the empty stairwell. Her father. Whatever he'd done to this family, it was buried deep enough that even Junho didn't know. And she was standing in the middle of it, disguised as a maid, engaged to a man whose mother hated her before ever knowing her real name. She barely slept that night. When she finally drifted off, it wasn't Madame Han's threats that haunted her. It was the memory of her father's face, calm and unreadable, the way it always was when he talked about the old Seoul days before she was born. He'd never spoken about a Han. Not once. The next morning, exhaustion made her clumsy. She dropped a tray of teacups in the east wing, porcelain shattering across marble, and before she could even kneel to gather the pieces, a shadow fell over her. You people can't do anything right, can you? Jenny looked up and her stomach dropped straight through the floor. Junho stood in the doorway. Not looking at her the way he used to. Not looking at her at all, really, just at the mess, irritation flickering across a face she knew better than her own. He hadn't recognized her. Of course he hadn't. Her hair was different, her clothes plain, her posture folded small the way survival had taught her to fold herself in rooms like this. "I'm sorry, sir," she murmured, keeping her eyes down, her voice pitched lower than usual, praying he wouldn't look closer. He crouched anyway, picking up a shard of porcelain, and for one terrifying second his eyes lifted to hers. Something flickered there. Pause. A frown, faint and fleeting, like a man catching a familiar scent in an unfamiliar room. Jenny's breath caught. Then it was gone. He stood, dropped the shard onto the tray and walked away without another word, leaving her kneeling in broken porcelain and the wreckage of her own fear. She realized with a cold, sinking clarity that this was no longer just about testing his family. If he found out the truth like this, not from her but by catching her in a lie, it wouldn't just end an engagement. It would end everything she'd hoped could be real between them. That evening, Madame Han summoned all the household staff for an inspection. Jenny stood in line with the others, spine straight, eyes forward, praying she'd become invisible enough to survive one more day. Madame Han walked the line slowly, appraising each maid like livestock, until she stopped directly in front of Jenny. Silence stretched long and suffocating. "You," Madame Han said finally. "What's your name again?" "Simi, ma'am." "Simi." Madame Han repeated it slowly like she was tasting a lie. Her eyes traced Jenny's face, the shape of her jaw, the set of her eyes, with an intensity that made Jenny's skin crawl. "You have a very familiar face." Jenny's pulse roared in her ears. "I have one of those faces, ma'am. People say that a lot." For a long moment, Madame Han said nothing. Then quietly, almost to herself, "Yes. I suppose you do." She moved on down the line and Jenny nearly buckled with relief, until she caught Yuna watching her from across the hall, arms crossed, head tilted, a slow and dangerous curiosity blooming behind her eyes. She'd survived tonight. But something told Jenny the walls of her disguise were closing in faster than she'd planned for. "Okay, I need to know what you all think is coming. Do you believe Junho already suspects who she really is, or is he still completely in the dark?" And that look Madame Han gave her, recognition or just suspicion? Drop your theories in the comments, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. 2 nights after the staff inspection, Jenny found herself alone in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed, scrubbing pots that didn't need scrubbing just to have somewhere to put her hands. Her mind wouldn't stop turning over Madame Han's words. "You have a very familiar face." She needed answers, and there was only one place in this house she hadn't dared search yet: Madame Han's private study. It was reckless. She knew it was reckless. But 3 weeks of silence had worn her down to something desperate. The door was unlocked. Inside, moonlight spilled across a wall of photographs. Old ones, yellowed at the edges, Madame Han decades younger, standing beside a shipping dock Jenny recognized instantly. Lagos Harbor. And beside her, unmistakably, a young man with her father's exact smile. Jenny's hand trembled as she lifted the frame closer. They weren't just business partners. The way they stood, close, comfortable, Madame Han's hand resting on his arm, told a story words hadn't yet. Looking for something? Jenny nearly dropped the frame. Yuna stood in the doorway, arms folded, no longer performing sweetness for an audience. "I was cleaning," Jenny said quickly. I saw dust on the. Save it. Yuna stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft, deliberate click. I've been watching you for days. The way you talk when you think no one's listening. The way you carry yourself like you're used to people obeying you, not the other way around. Her eyes narrowed. Who are you really? Jenny's heart hammered. There was no version of this conversation that ended safely. I told you. Don't. Yuna's voice cracked like a whip. I know a liar when I see one. I live with two of them. For a moment neither spoke. Then Yuna's gaze drifted to the photograph still clutched in Jenny's hand, and something shifted in her expression. Softer, almost tired. That's my mother, Yuna said quietly, before everything fell apart. Before your father. She stopped herself, jaw tightening. Jenny's breath caught. You know who I am. I've suspected since the second night. Yuna crossed her arms tighter like she was holding herself together. The way you flinched when mother mentioned your father's name. Maids don't flinch at names they've never heard. Jenny set the photograph down carefully, her hands unsteady. Then why haven't you told anyone? Because I wanted to know why, Yuna snapped. Why would the great Jenny Adeyemi-Kim humiliate herself scrubbing our floors? Why not just marry my brother and disappear into your money like every other rich woman? Because I don't want a marriage built on a lie, Jenny said, and for the first time since walking through that gate, her voice came out sharp, unguarded, entirely her own. I wanted to know if your family loved Junho or loved what marrying me could do for you. I needed the truth before I gave you my whole life. Yuna stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. Then quietly, you should have just asked. Would you have told me the truth? Yuna didn't answer. And that silence said everything. My mother's business collapsed 20 years ago, Yuna finally said, voice low. She always blamed a partner who betrayed her, took her designs, undercut her contracts, left her buried in debt she's still paying off today. She spent 2 decades hating a name. She looked at the photograph in Jenny's hand. Your father's name. Jenny's stomach turned to ice. My father never mentioned any of this. Not once. Maybe he had his own version of the story, Yuna said. But my mother doesn't care about versions. He cares about revenge. And you walking into this house wearing her son's ring. She shook her head slowly. She was never going to let that happen quietly. Somewhere down the hallway a door creaked. Both women froze. She can't find you in here, Yuna whispered urgently, grabbing Jenny's wrist and pulling her toward the study door. Not yet. Not like this. Why are you helping me? Yuna paused at the door, her expression flickering between guarded and something almost gentle. Because my brother actually looks happy when he talks about you. And I haven't seen him look like that in a very long time. Her eyes hardened again. But if you hurt him, if any part of this is a game to you, I will personally make sure you regret it. She shoved Jenny into the hallway just as footsteps rounded the corner. Madame Han stood there, robe wrapped tight, eyes sharp even at this late hour. She looked between the two women, the study door still ajar behind them, and her expression went cold and knowing. Well, she said slowly, stepping closer, isn't this an interesting picture? Jenny's blood ran cold. Whatever fragile secrecy she'd been hiding behind for 3 weeks was about to collapse in front of her. This is the moment everything starts unraveling. Madame Han is standing right there and Jenny has nowhere left to hide. Do you think Yuna is going to cover for her? Or has she already decided Jenny isn't worth the risk? Let me know what you think happens next in the comments and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Madame Han's eyes moved slowly between Jenny and Yuna, and for a long moment nobody breathed. I asked you a question, Madame Han said, stepping closer, robe pooling around her slippers. What were you doing in my study? At this hour. She was helping me look for a misplaced ledger, Yuna said smoothly before Jenny could open her mouth. I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get ahead on the accounts. Madame Han's gaze didn't waver from Jenny's face. Is that so? Yes, ma'am, Jenny whispered, eyes down, praying her voice didn't shake as badly as her hands. For a moment, Madame Han said nothing. Then she reached out slowly and tilted Jenny's chin up with 2 fingers, forcing their eyes to meet directly for the first time. Jenny's heart stopped. Madame Han studied her face the way someone studies an old photograph, searching for a resemblance they're afraid to confirm. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. You may go, Madame Han finally said, releasing her chin. Both of you. Back to your rooms. Jenny didn't wait to be told twice. She walked, spine rigid, past Madame Han and down the corridor, Yuna a half step behind her until they were both safely out of earshot. That was too close, Yuna breathed once they turned the corner. She knows, Jenny whispered. Or she's about to. Maybe. But tonight isn't the night she confirms it. Yuna's expression hardened again, the softness from the study long gone. You need to tell my brother the truth. Before she does it for you in the worst possible way. Jenny knew Yuna was right. But telling Junho meant risking everything. Not just the engagement but the fragile, real thing that had grown between them before any of this disguise, any of this fear, any of this inherited hatred between their families. She didn't get the chance to decide on her own terms. 2 days later, Junho found her in the garden at dusk, gathering linens off the drying line, unaware he'd even entered until his voice cut through the quiet. Simi. Jenny froze back, still turned. That's not your name, is it? Slowly she turned around. Junho stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable in the fading light. Not angry, not yet, just still, like a man standing at the edge of a decision he didn't want to make. Junho. I knew, he said quietly, cutting her off. The second day. The way you held your teacup at breakfast. The way you corrected my mother's math without thinking, then caught yourself. Jenny doesn't disappear that easily, even in a maid's uniform. Her breath caught. You knew? For weeks. I wanted to see how long you'd let me believe a lie, he said, and for the first time real hurt bled into his voice. I wanted to know if you trusted me enough to just tell me the truth. Instead I watched you scrub my family's floors and let my sister humiliate you, and you said nothing. I couldn't, Jenny said, stepping toward him, desperate now to make him understand. Your mother hates my father. I overheard her. Some betrayal 20 years old, something about a business collapse. I needed to know if your family's warmth toward me was real, or if it was about my money healing whatever wound she's been carrying since before either of us was born. Junho went very still. What did you hear exactly? That my father destroyed something she built. That she spent 2 decades hating his name. Jenny searched his face desperately. Did you know? Any of it? No, he said, and the word came out rough, disoriented, like the ground had shifted under him too. She's never spoken about your father. Not once. For a moment they simply stood there. 2 people who thought they knew each other completely, realizing how much had been hidden on both sides. I'm sorry, Jenny finally said. I should have trusted you with this from the beginning instead of trusting a disguise. Junho stepped closer, close enough that she could see the conflict still warring behind his eyes. Hurt, love, confusion, all tangled together. I'm angry, he admitted quietly. But I understand why you did it. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt, watching you let my family treat you like nothing. I hated every second of it, Jenny whispered. Then why didn't you stop? Because I needed to know the truth. About your family. About us. Her voice cracked, finally, after weeks of holding herself together. I needed to know if what we have is real enough to survive it. Junho reached out and gently tilted her chin up, the same gesture his mother had used 2 nights earlier. But where Madame Han's touch had been cold and searching, his was something else entirely. Certain. It's real, he said quietly. It was always real, Jenny. Disguise or not. For one suspended moment, the weight of 3 unbearable weeks lifted, and it was just the 2 of them in the fading garden light, the truth finally standing between them instead of hiding behind it. Then from the house a scream shattered the quiet. Both of them turned toward the sound, toward Madame Han's private study, where smoke was beginning to curl out from beneath the door. Junho took off running toward the house before Jenny could even process what she'd seen. She sprinted after him, heart slamming against her ribs, the scream still echoing in her ears. Inside, chaos had already erupted. Staff rushed past with buckets, someone shouted for the fire extinguisher, and there, in the doorway of the study, her robe singed at the sleeve, her hands shaking, stood Madame Han, staring at the flames consuming her desk like she'd started them herself. Mother! Junho grabbed her, pulling her back from the smoke. What happened? The photographs, Madame Han said, voice hollow, eyes fixed on the fire. I was burning the photographs. Jenny understood instantly. 20 years of pain, and Madame Han had chosen tonight. The night her secret nearly surfaced. to try to erase the evidence herself. The fire was contained within minutes, staff working fast with extinguishers, but the damage was done. Half the study lay blackened, papers turned to ash, the photograph of two young business partners in Lagos Harbor curled and burned at the edges on the floor. Madame Han sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 60-some years, all her composure gone. Someone needs to explain what's going on, Junho said, kneeling in front of his mother. Right now? Madame Han's eyes lifted to Jenny, standing in the doorway still in her maid's uniform, and something in her finally broke. 22 years ago, she began, voice trembling, your father and I built a textile export business together. Half his money, half my designs. We were close, closer than business partners should be. Her eyes flickered briefly to the burned photograph. Then the contracts fell apart. Overnight. Our biggest buyer pulled out, claiming they'd found a cheaper supplier. I lost everything. My name, my credit, nearly my family. And you blamed my father, Jenny said quietly. I believed he sold our contracts to that buyer behind my back. That he chose his own empire over what we built together. Madame Han's voice cracked. I've hated his name for 2 decades. And when Junho brought you home wearing his face in your eyes, I couldn't separate you from him. I wanted you to suffer the way I suffered. I wanted you to feel small in my house the way I felt small when everything collapsed. Jenny stepped further into the room, something steady rising in her despite the ash and smoke still hanging in the air. My father never mentioned a business in Seoul. Not once in my entire life. But I know him. He wouldn't have done what you're describing, not for profit, not for anything. She paused. Did you ever ask him? 20 years, and did you ever once ask him why? Madame Han said nothing. I think, Jenny said gently, you built a story around your pain because it hurt less than not knowing the truth. Silence stretched through the ruined study, broken only by the faint drip of water from the extinguished fire. There's a way to find out, Jenny finally said. My father kept records of every contract he ever signed going back decades. If someone undercut your buyer without his knowledge, it'll be there. If he did betray you, her voice didn't waver, I'll stand here and let you hate me for it. But I don't think that's what you'll find. Took 4 days. Jenny flew to Lagos herself, working with her father's old company archivist, digging through decades of paperwork until she found it. A signed memo, dated 3 weeks before the contract collapse, showing that a rival Korean conglomerate had bribed the original buyer directly, cutting both her father and Madame Han out entirely. Her father had spent months trying to renegotiate on Madame Han's behalf before quietly giving up, assuming she'd already moved on, never knowing she'd spent 20 years hating him for a betrayal that was never his. When Jenny placed the documents in front of Madame Han, the older woman read them twice, hands trembling, before finally setting them down. 20 years, Madame Han whispered. I built an entire wall around my heart for 20 years, over a lie I told myself. You're not the only one who built walls, Jenny said softly. I built mine out of a maid's uniform. Madame Han looked up at her. Really looked, without suspicion, without inherited hatred clouding her vision. And for the first time since Jenny had walked through that gate, she saw something almost like respect in the older woman's eyes. I owe you an apology, Madame Han said. More than one. You owe my father a phone call, Jenny replied. He's wondered about you more than you'd think. The wedding happened 6 weeks later than planned, but it happened. Madame Han stood in the front row, no longer performing warmth for an audience, but offering it freely, tears in her eyes as her son married the woman she'd once treated like she was worth nothing. Yuna stood beside Jenny as a bridesmaid, no longer testing her but fiercely, protectively loyal, the way sisters are supposed to be. And Junho, holding Jenny's hands at the altar, leaned in and whispered the same words he'd said to her in that garden, smoke curling toward the sky behind them. It was always real. There's something quietly devastating about how much pain gets built on stories we tell ourselves instead of truths we're brave enough to ask for. Madame Han spent 20 years hating a man who never wronged her, and Jenny spent 3 weeks hiding from a family who only needed honesty, not a disguise, to finally see her. So tell me, do you think Jenny was right to go undercover, or should she have trusted Junho with the truth from day one? And if you were in Madame Han's position, could you have let go of 20 years of anger that easily? I want to hear your honest thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, do me a favor. Hit subscribe, turn on that notification bell and share this with someone who needs a little Afro-Soul magic in their day. New stories drop all the time and I promise you don't want to miss what's coming next.